Well, I'd like to welcome everyone. We're going to begin in a few minutes. And I see we have some polling going on. People are actively answering who's in the room and what would you like to learn tonight. So I just want to say welcome. We still have a few minutes for our poll, but we have a wonderful evening planned. We are Gateway Lab Charter School, and we have a guest this evening. And this is the very first night of our parent education, our community outreach education series. This has been a goal for a long time for us to not just deal with our own community, but have the ability to reach out to the community at large and offer a series for education, because that's who we are. We're educators, and we are a community of learners as well. And so some of the things that we're going to be looking at this evening, as far as, well, we were going to look at it in a second. We will look at the webinar etiquette 101, and there will be a time for questions and answers. We will have an opportunity for you to ask your questions in a Q&A feature. We are not doing chat this evening, so that will be disabled, but the Q&A I think will be a lot of fun. And throughout the evening, we're going to do polling. So my name is Catherine Dolan. I'm the head of school at the Gateway Lab Charter School. We are a free public charter school, and we basically exist for kids who learn differently, who may have some challenges along the way, who see the world from a different perspective. And actually, that's a very good thing. So we're going to begin by talking a little bit about fairy tales. And you may say, why fairy tales? Well, once Albert Einstein was asked the question, what do you do if you want your children to be smart? And his answer was, tell them fairy tales. And then he was asked, well, what do you do if you want your children to be very smart? And his answer was, tell them more fairy tales. And so I said to myself, what is it about fairy tales that make them so powerful? Well, they have basic elements. They exist in all the different cultures around the world, and they have elements that we love. They have elements of magic. They have elements of secret powers. They're usually about struggle and a journey. Usually they're patterns of, say, 3 things they have to overcome. And so when we see fairy tales that appear to be untruths, they are actually a way of teaching very deep, meaningful truths. So tonight, I want to talk a little bit about a fairy tale. And so I want to set the stage for you before I introduce our speaker. And in this fairy tale, once upon a time, in a land so very far away, or maybe not quite so far away, this land was called USA, USA. And in this land of USA, there was a dreaded and terrible dragon. And this dragon had been ravishing the land. Very few people ever saw USA, but the effects were devastating. And the dragon's name was COVID. And when we start our story, we see 2 children at the edge of a dark forest. And they're fearful and they are cloaked in heavy, heavy cloaks. but these cloaks do make them invisible. They are cloaks of invisibility, and they're hiding. They're hiding from 3 little dragons that are also ravaging the land. Because COVID has been so successful at terrorizing USA, the little dragons are emboldened. And the first one is a fire-breathing dragon. Oh, it makes your face just burn hot, and it makes your heart pound in your chest, and it stops you from doing practically anything you want to do. And his name is Fee. His little nickname is Fee, but his long name is Fear. And there's a second dragon. And this dragon doesn't sound as dreadful because it breathes ice, but it freezes you. It freezes you. You can't run. You can't move. His nickname is Anx, but his long name is Anxiety. And there's a third dragon. The third dragon breathes smoke, and the smoke envelops you. It causes confusion. You can't see clearly. You can't make your way out of it. And the smoke is heavy. And this dragon's nickname is D, but its long name is Depression. And the children are hiding, and they have to get through this dark forest of unknowing. And beyond that is the maze of uncertainty. And beyond that, because you have to have 3 in a fairy tale, is the troubled sea. And they have no idea how they're going to make their way. They have come as far as they can go on their own. And suddenly there appears before them another cloaked character. And now they are very fearful. They don't know if this cloaked character is good or bad until the character throws off her cloak and you see her with her dark flowing hair. And she's beautiful, and she speaks to them in a kind and gentle and compassionate voice. And they know she is good. And many, many fairy tales have the guide who take them through their journey. And this fairy tale also has a guide. Now, many of you may be watching The Mandalorian on Disney Plus. Well, this guide is the Meghan Walls, who is going to guide our children through the maze, through the forest, and through the troubled sea. And they are looking for the land of Gliss. And they've heard that in this land of Gliss, you don't need cloaks of invisibility because you can be yourself. And they find deep inside of you gifts and talents that were there all along. You just didn't know it. And they bloom and they blossom and they grow. So before I introduce you, because tonight we happen to have the Meghan Walls with us, what could be better? I want to show you just a little glimpse of what 2 parents learned about this land of Gliss and why children might want to find their way there, even though it's very scary. Let's take a look at this video clip.
My daughter's experience at Gateway has been astounding. She came to Gateway 4 years ago, not able to read, 5th grader, not able to write, afraid to go to school, basically traumatized. The teachers here nurtured her every day and gave her a firm foundation until she was secure and calm enough to attend school, to the point where she had a self-actualization that I can learn. And now she has every goal and intention to go to college, which we never thought was going to happen.
In just 3 months, our experience has been pretty phenomenal. He's focusing more, he's getting better grades. His classroom size in a traditional school setting was 27, and at Gateway, the classroom size has been 8. So my son, with his learning differences, he really needs that personal attention, and that's the number one thing that he's gotten here at Gateway. And because of the small classroom sizes, Orion has learned how to not only appreciate, but support other children and their learning differences. So he's not looked at like someone who stands out or is different. He's a part of a community, and he's part of a group of individuals that are honored for the way they learn, not necessarily the way they don't learn. And that, for him in his personal life, has been huge, because the big piece of that is acceptance. So for him to be able to accept himself and others has been phenomenal.
Her ability to make friends, her ability to have relationships, nurture relationships, her love of learning, that all came from here. Her confidence, her character, her desire to learn would have never existed without the teachers and administration here at Gateway.
Thank you. They were two parents who have had the experience of the land of GLIS, which is GLS, which is Gateway Lab School. We have a little poll just to ask, what's the first thing you will do once COVID-19 is over? And we're just anxious to see what you're really anxious to do. And I see lots of hugging and trip taking and partying. We'll give you just a minute to answer so we can see what you have in mind that brings you through COVID. Looking forward to doing these things. Lots of trip taking. Fun to see. Well, let me introduce you to our guide, to our guest this evening. And actually, our guide, our guest, is Dr. Meghan Wall. Not the Meghan Wall, but she is just as lovely as the children experienced her in the fairy tale. She's a pediatric psychologist in the Division of Behavioral Health at Nemours. And she also is a clinical assistant professor of pediatrics at Thomas Jefferson University. She has a focus on social determinants of health, understanding toxic stress, and positive parenting. We're all looking for a guide like this in this time of COVID. She is here tonight, and she is going to talk about the three little dragons of depression and fear and anxiety, and how it affects our children, but not only how it affects our children, how it affects us, and then we affect our children. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Walls and turn this presentation over to her. Dr. Walls.
Thanks, Catherine. Let me share this screen here so we can get started. So hopefully, I don't know how we can check if our folks can see our screen, but I assume if you guys can see it, that they can see it. So thank you for that nice welcome. I am happy to be here. I have been doing lots of talking about the mental health piece around COVID, and am happy to be here talking tonight, and we'll have some time for questions and answers afterwards, certainly. So as we're sort of going through, if questions come up, we can answer those and keep going. So I think one of the really important things here is thinking about why has COVID sort of had this effect on mental health? And when we as psychologists think about mental health, we think about a few things that keep people grounded or stable. And those are things like connectedness, sense of time, sense of purpose. And COVID has sort of come in as this storm and tsunami together and knocked a lot of those out. So one of the biggest things that causes anxiety in people, kids and adults, is this concept of not knowing what's next, right? So when you think about yourself as a parent or a teacher, or, you know, even just an employee at your job, if you had no idea what was happening tomorrow or the next day, or no idea what was expected of you, you would start to feel anxious. And that's what COVID has done to sort of our current functioning. So we don't really know what's happening tomorrow. You know, I think most of us who are listening are in Delaware, and we've seen the spikes in Delaware. We expect some restrictions to come back. So the unknown is a really hard one. But also that lack of sense of time and purpose. And I don't know about all of you, but there was a time in probably March and April where I couldn't tell you what day it was or what time it was. So those things have sort of all come to a head. And then other things like social isolation. So not being able to connect as much to other humans, inability to engage in those activities we really like. And for our kids and teens, I think of those as some of their sports or activities, which some of have opened back up, but some have not. So kids haven't been able to go back, but also for adults. So maybe your gym was closed, or maybe you used to take a walk with 4 neighbors and didn't feel comfortable doing that. And then the other thing that I think is important here is, one of the things about anxiety and depression and fear is that there's this sense of irrational or negative thoughts that we talk about as sort of things that probably won't come true, but that we're afraid will. And COVID has turned those into reality for some people. So for people who worry about the sickness of people they love, for people who worry about losing people, this has really become a reality. So we've created this storm. And I always start off with this because I think it's important to set the tone, but it also doesn't mean that everyone's going to have these really negative outcomes. However, I think it's important that we talk about what we do know. So the CDC has done a couple surveys on mental health. They call them pulse surveys. And across the country, around 40% of adults, so not our kiddos, but adults, have said that, yes, during COVID, I've had at least one adverse mental or behavioral health condition. Now, that might just be a symptom or two of depression or anxiety, but something there. And, you know, when you think about that, it makes sense. And I think for me, it's almost comforting that everyone has struggled with this in some way. It may not be the same way. 11% of adults surveyed said they had some form of thoughts of suicide in the last 30 days. And that is significantly different than normal. So when we are in non-COVID times, it is not normal for 10% of the population to be thinking about suicide. For youth, what does it mean? So they just recently did a study on ED visits and the emergency room, and saw this great increase, right? So especially for those older kids, we're up 30% for mental health visits. So those are things like suicidality, wanting to hurt other people, pretty severe mental illness stuff. And then interestingly, in Massachusetts, they did a study of youth, and they found that our youth had increased suicidal ideation, but not increased attempts and completed suicides. And I think that's particularly important because as we focus on what can we do and how can we make people resilient, I want to emphasize that not talking about this stuff and not addressing suicidality, depression, anxiety doesn't actually fix it. It makes it worse. But when we do address it, and that's my guess of why we've had an increase in suicidal ideation, but not completion, is that it actually helps. It actually tampers down some of those mental health issues. So what do we do? COVID is changing every day. And one of the very first things that I think we need to talk about when we're thinking about mental health is just how are we talking about this virus in general? You probably know as parents and caregivers and teachers more now than you knew in March and April, right? So in March, when your kids asked you, what do we do? You probably were like, I don't know. But now we do know, right? So we know that if our kids ask a question about how we stay safe, we talk about washing hands, keeping distance, wearing masks. Those are important things. But your child should tell you what they know first, because you might be boring them, or they might be doing really okay, and you're asking them, assuming they're not. So just starting by asking, what do you know, is really important. And as the disease and virus changes, and as we, I think a lot of in the news this week, I think about the talk about vaccines and medications. I think the most important thing we do is to just ask our kids, what do you want to know? What can I help you with? And then ask if they want to know more. I laugh a lot because parents have these conversations with their younger kids, and they'll ask a 6 or 7-year-old, what do you know? And they're like, oh, coronavirus is here, and so we can't play with our friends. And they're like, do you have any other questions? And the kid's like, no, and walks away. And there's other kids who will ask you questions all day. So making sure you're gauging how you're interacting with children according to what they need, not according to your own anxiety or what you need in that moment. encouraging conversations about emotional well-being is really, really important. Modeling those good coping skills. So if you're angry, it's okay to be angry, but what do we do with it? And then keeping those conversations ongoing. So I really have been recommending to families and to teachers, like, check in, just keep checking in, and then normalizing conversations about mental health and mental health treatment. So especially as you're working with those tweens and teens, it's okay to say something like, a lot of people are more stressed or sad or down during COVID than they normally are. And have you felt any of those things? That's okay to have those conversations and really normalize it. Setting the stage of how you have a conversation is probably the most important thing in talking to kids and teens, but it's also the most important thing when we talk to each other. So if you're checking with your partner, your friends, and checking on how people are doing, you don't want the wording to be something like, I know COVID's happening and you're stressed, but you're okay, right? Instead, leave that open. Do you want to talk about anything? Is there anything that you think would be useful, and sort of going from there? So I think those are important things just to set the stage. So what does this mean? I already mentioned this, but I will say it 100 times. It's really important to talk about mental health. It's important that we are open and honest, and even as an adult, that we're honest with ourselves if we're really struggling. I think it also means we need to encourage protective factors and approaches, and I'm going to talk about those a lot tonight. It's also important to seek guidance around mental health and to talk about openly. Kids and adults need therapy or medication sometimes to help. So really putting it out there that if a family is struggling, a child is struggling, we are going to help you. That's so important during this time. I think I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that health disparities from COVID physically certainly exist, right? We know that for Delaware, in our Hispanic and Latino populations, as well as in some of our pockets of our cities with Black families, there have been spikes in these rates of COVID, and we really are seeing health disparities. And we're seeing that in terms of income as well. So we're seeing families who, are working hourly jobs and have to go into work having higher levels of COVID in some cases. So I think it's important to note that perhaps we might see these health disparities play out in a way for mental health. How can we expect that folks who are most affected by COVID aren't going to also struggle with certain things in certain times? But another thing that I think is incredibly important to talk about is the fact that I look at COVID as I think it was interesting to compare it almost to this fairy tale and to the beast. But I also think it is like any other trauma. And what we know about trauma is that some kids and parents will be absolutely fine. They will walk through this fire and they will come out the other side and you won't know. Other kids will really struggle. Other parents will really struggle. And does that depend on some of their support systems and what else is going on in their lives and how COVID has affected them? Absolutely, 100%. But we know that this can be different. So when we think about those conversations, to me, anxiety, depression, fear are, and we'll talk more about this still, are sort of these symptoms and reactions. And we might see some of them and we might not. But I think to set the stage to have the conversations about them is one of the most powerful tools that you can have as a parent. So thinking about that is really important, and not making that assumption, right? So we're not going to assume that just because my child's, grandfather had COVID, right, that they are going to have severe trauma. What we're going to assume is that we should always check in with kids and that it's never a bad idea. And the same goes really for adults. So when I think about, for the parents who are listening, like, what should you be doing? One of the things that I think about is, it's okay if one of your friends is more stressed out over COVID than you are. It's okay if you are more stressed out than one of your friends, and it's normal, and I'd expect that. So I really think it's important to think about the fact that it's not every kid, it's not every parent, it's not every person, and we really need to be independently thinking about each child and each adult. I put this in here because my favorite thing to tell people when we talk about what's happening and our kids and adults is The number one protective factor for children, it does not matter what we're looking at, COVID, trauma, whatever, is one caring, consistent adult. Hands down, proven over and over with research. And it's from the Center on the Developing Child for Harvard. But I mention that because I think so often we worry about things like loneliness and things like not having the connectedness. We worry about what if our kid's home with us instead of out and about. And sure, does this start with early childhood? Absolutely. But there is so much good research on quality time with family. And so I like to start with this as a protective factor because I like to remind people that sometimes your protective factor is already in your house. It doesn't mean your child or you will never feel anxious or depressed, but those connections between a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or, whomever is guardian in a child are really important. This also goes for some of our older kids as we think about some of the research on things like family dinners, right? So teenagers who have dinner with their family are less likely to use substances, more likely to come to parents when they have a problem. So really think about in your home, you as the adult who's probably listening are the protective factor. You are the number one protective factor. And I don't say that lightly. And some parents say, oh my gosh, that feels like a lot of pressure, but I don't think it's pressure. I think it's this sort of privilege of how can I then, if I'm the protective factor, help my kid? But the cool thing is that research also says that parents who have close relationships with their kids are less likely to have anxiety, depression, some of those things. So it's actually a two-way street here. And I would encourage you to really take some time and think about, are we finding ways to maximize quality time, not quantity time? I, like you, most of you, have been in the house with my family for a very long time, and it is not fun every day, and I don't want to be around them every day, every hour. But I have kids who are in kindergarten and third grade, and we carve out game nights, and we carve out an hour to read a book, and we carve out an hour to go on a walk. That time, that quality time is so important. It is not the quantity of time. There's nothing that says how many hours you're with your kid a day is what makes or breaks it. It's about being in the moment with them. So putting away those screens and really paying attention. So I start with that because it's an easy one we can all do in some way, even if it's 10 minutes a day with your kid or the child in your household. That really, really matters. What else can we do? So how do we fight this perfect storm? This storm that is bringing fear, this storm that is causing anxiety, this storm that is making people feel down and depressed. Number one is we get back to our schedules and routines. I will admit again myself, there was a time in April where my kids were not going to bed on time and where I think they were struggling more with just crankiness and irritability. There was a time when I was working from home and if I didn't have a meeting till 9, I just go to bed a little later. But we've gotten back on our schedule in my house and I've encouraged my patients to do the same. You don't need a Pinterest color coordinated schedule. It's lovely, but you don't need that to be effective in this. What you need is an entire family who knows what to expect. So we talked about those expectations, and I go back to that because I think it's just so incredibly important that we think about that clearly. Meal times, right? Simple. Those go away sometimes when we're all in the house and all overlapping and everyone's on the computers. What is your work and school schedule? And then also routines, right? So getting back into, we're not gonna watch a show before bed and then just crash when we're tired. Even as an adult, I'm going to, at 10:30, set my alarm to read my book for a half hour and then I'm going to sleep. Your routines help your body to get back on track. The other thing that schedules and routines do is it actually sends a message to your brain of, oh, they're functioning how they normally do. Things must not be so bad. So this is actually changing how we think about things when we just stick to our schedules and our routines. Sleep is probably my biggest soapbox and the hardest thing for people to wrap their heads around sometimes. The most protective thing in terms of sleep is a same bedtime every night for kids, and for up to middle school kids by 9 p.m. So they don't have to be asleep at 9 p.m., but in bed by then. Setting an alarm, even if you're all virtual, the same wake times, the same sleep times, and then figuring out if your kids or you are not sleeping, what's getting in my way? Am I thinking about that work project? Is it that my house is a mess? Is it that I can't figure out, which of these things that I want to do that are still on my plate. So thinking about that stress is really also important. And the other thing I'll say about sleep is, I don't have this in here in the slide, but kids need a lot more sleep than you think they do. So I think all think about like 8 hours, but really our teenagers need up to 11, from 8 to 11, depending on the kind of scale. And our little guys need 10-ish hours of sleep. So, and by little, I mean elementary school. Our little guys need even more than that. And I think sometimes we count backwards to like 8 hours and we think our kids are okay, but they actually need more than that. So figuring out your kids' sleep sweet spot is a really good idea. What else can we do? We can adjust our expectations. I think it's fair that we can all say at this point, none of us are doing the exact same things we were doing before COVID. If we can adjust those expectations, we have less of those sort of feelings of failing. And then for adults, it's using good coping, but also modeling good coping. And this is just so incredibly important. I love these pictures, and I think that it's really critical that we address how this goes both ways. And the reason I say that is because your kids are going to model how you react. So when we talk about things like being virtual school, if they're frustrated with it, if we talk about things like, I don't know, soccer closing down, right? If you're yelling and screaming, they're going to match you. They're going to yell and scream. However, it is okay if your kids know you're upset. I love this picture in the bottom with the little girl leaning on her mom, because your kids do not have to be happy-go-lucky every second. You don't have to be happy-go-lucky every second. They can match you, right? They can model the fact that sometimes good coping is having a cry and giving your partner or your kid a hug, right? That's okay. But if we model that yelling and screaming is okay, we get these top pictures, right? And we don't want our kids to emulate that, but we also don't want them to think that screaming and yelling is the only way to deal with our bad feelings. So I really encourage parents and caregivers to walk this line. Feel what you're going to feel. Sometimes you got to close your door and feel what you're going to feel quietly, and then go to your kiddo if it's something that's major, right? I gave this advice a lot around school. Parents were frustrated whether their kids were in person or in school. They were just having frustration around it. And I said, take your breath, figure out what your plan is, and then come back to your child. But your kids do pick up on what you do. They do pick up on how you cope. Good coping is not never being angry or never being sad. Good coping is knowing what to do when you are angry or sad. And we're going to talk more about that as well. I wanted to, before I get to sort of talking about the coping piece, which is sort of where I'll end, I wanted to mention screens because I think this is also important. A lot of kids are on screen now with virtual learning, but even like virtual meetups, that kind of stuff. Parents are asking a lot about what's this doing to our kids' brains. So the first thing we talk about is what we know about data is that there is a connection between depression, anxiety, and social media screen time. So if you look at hours or minutes, actually it's broken down to minutes spent on things like Instagram and Facebook, the correlation with depression goes up, right? So more depressive symptoms for the longer teens are on social media, especially comparative platforms. And what I mean by that is not like they're chatting apps, but you're seeing other people's lives. Someone's traveling, someone's, I don't know, got a new puppy, I don't know what they're doing, but those things actually make kids feel more depressed. I would argue it probably stands the same for adults, but it hasn't been studied as well. Have household discussions. It's not good for anyone to be on their screens all day. So sitting and having a discussion about what do we expect in our house? Do we have screen-free time? Do we have time that we are going to, I have a landing place for screens, all put our phones in a bucket for the night? Do we have 2 hours where maybe at the end of the night you like to scroll through as a parent, right, your phone, but for 2 hours before that, you're going to put it away with your kid's iPad. And then limiting that screen time via apps. There is an app that's actually called Screen Time, great name. And you can control your kids' apps from your phone or from your computer and just say they can only have a half hour of, I don't know, Facebook, but I'm not going to block their school website, right? So you can actually go around and do those things. And then I think it's important, just as everything else during this pandemic, that we're checking in. Is that plan working? Does this make sense? So I think those are all really important things we think about, because screens are becoming more, I think, more and more used by both kids, teens, and adults. And so I want us to be thoughtful about how that impacts our functioning. Okay, so we have these protective factors. We're going to get on our schedules. We're going to get more sleep. This all sounds great. What happens if kids are still struggling and adults are still struggling? So how do we know? What are our signs of anxiety and depression? And what do we do about them? The number one sign that something is up is change in behavior. So changes in appetite, sleep, social interactions are our big three. Your kid is sleeping a lot. They're not sleeping at all. You are sleeping a lot. You are not sleeping at all. You find that you can only eat snacks while you're walking through the house because you're too nervous to sit down and eat a full meal. Your friend calls and you don't answer the phone, even though you haven't talked to anyone that day because it feels hard. Those are sort of signs that, maybe something's up. Now, if those signs are there for a day or two, no big deal. But when they're there for a week or two, that's when I really start to think, maybe there is something more than this. And again, we talked about the preventive things and how to keep us on track. But just like any other diseases, anxiety and depression can manifest anyway, especially if there's a stressor. So we need to be aware of these signs. For teenagers, talking about low mood and suicidality, I've heard a lot of teenagers during COVID talk about this in what we call passive terms. So things like, I just don't want to be here, which maybe they don't want to be in school or in the room, but sometimes means a bigger, I don't want to be here. Saying they're sad a lot, right? Being tearful. So you tell your kid, you can't have, I don't know, that dessert. And instead of yelling at you, they just break down in full tears, right? And that goes on for a while. Feeling irritable or restless. So in teenagers and kids, one of the top symptoms of depression is actually irritability. So in adults, it's sadness, but it looks different in kids and teens. And often it's your teen who's snapping at you every moment, every time you ask them something, not normal teenage hormones, but seems worse and more difficult. It's your 7-year-old who yells back at you immediately because you did something very small that really upsets them, and that continues to go on. Other things are you've tried coping, you've tried getting them on the schedules, doing all these things, and it's still not working. And then another one I think is really important, especially during COVID, is we call these somatic complaints, right? Which just means physical complaints. Frequent headaches and stomach aches, and you take your kid to the doctor or you yourself go to the doctor and they can't really find anything majorly wrong. Stress, and I really strongly push this with kids. It doesn't mean your headache or stomach ache's not real. Stress causes headaches. Stress causes stomach aches. It just might not be that, you have a GI disorder. It might just be that you have stress that's contributing to how you feel. So thinking about those things, and if you start to see these things in your kids, making sure you're aware of what they are and what they mean. So what else can we do? Encouraging an actual social schedule is really, really important. So when I think about sort of where we are right now, I think about the COVID spike. I think about the fact that we are working pretty hard to get it under control, but that I don't think we're through yet. And so I want people to be creative. Social connectedness has so many positive outcomes, but also, has outcomes that are linked to increased mood, but also increased physical health. So when we lose those connections, we expect we're going to have some of this. Be creative, but safe. So for teenagers, they can sit outside separated and talk to each other, and probably don't need you there. For you as adults, can you go on a walk with a friend and stay 6 feet apart and chat, right? Can you see people in person in some safe ways? But then also, if we get shut down again, making sure that we are clear on, hey, I'm going to call you tonight at 8:00. Can you talk then? Because so many of us are so busy and we don't actually make the time to schedule this. So I think that's another really important piece. The next piece is teaching our kids and teens to sort of overcome difficulty and be more flexible. And the reason I put this on here is because I actually like parents to have that conversation with your kids pretty frankly. So saying things like, one of the things that makes us be able to be resilient, or for little guys, one of the things that makes us strong is to be able to do things even when it's hard. So accepting those emotions, this is sad, this is anxiety provoking, and we're going to get through it. There are 3 coping skills that I really like that I have kids do at home. And some of these are things you would learn in therapy as well. But these are my top 3 that are on the screen right now, are how to help kids have active coping skills. So we can talk about going on a walk. We can talk about hanging out with friends. We can talk about, I don't know, crying if you are sad. But what do we give kids actively to do? What do we give adults actively to do? Diaphragmatic breathing is hands down, without fail, my number one coping technique I give to people. The concept of diaphragmatic breathing is that you are taking slow, low breaths. It sounds silly. People get annoyed when people say take a deep breath, but you can use the Calm app. You can use YouTube. If you put in diaphragmatic breathing, it basically is breathing in through your nose for a few seconds. It differs, but we do 3 with kids and teens most time. Holding it for a second and breathing out for 3 seconds. Easy math, 6-second breaths mean you only take 10 breaths a minute. When we are really nervous, I've seen kids taking up to 20 breaths a minute. So we actually are really tamping that down. The other thing about diaphragmatic breathing is if it's done well and practiced daily and you become very good at it, it actually changes your entire physiology. For you adults who are listening, there are multiple studies where people have high blood pressure, do diaphragmatic breathing every night, and lower their blood pressure permanently. Really, really effective. When we look at kids when they're doing this, we do something called biofeedback. So we'll check their skin temp, we can look at their sweat, and we find that kids stop sweating. Their hand temperature I've seen go up so when you're really anxious, your blood goes to the middle of your body, and when you're relaxed, it goes back out to your fingers. I've seen kids raise their temperatures in their hands 7 degrees. So it is so powerful, and kids love seeing that. But you can also download something called BioBelly app, and that actually just, it will start playing music when the kids are breathing slowly. So anything that gives feedback is good. Progressive muscle relaxation is tightening and releasing your muscles all throughout your body. And we do that in a way that I think helps kids to get that physical feeling of stress out of their bodies. And then the last one that I talk about is guided imagery. And I talk about guided imagery mostly because it's a great one for like sleeping, calming down. I tell kids and parents all the time, you can put guided imagery into YouTube and find anything. So it might be walking through a forest, walking on a beach. Some of them are like floating on a cloud. Without fail, kids fall asleep listening to these. One of my patients put an Alexa like little dot in her kid's room, and they say, Alexa, play guided imagery, and it plays it for her every night, and she falls asleep super easily. So these are things that are actually active coping skills. And then the last thing, that we talk about with kids is just challenging negative thoughts, and you don't have to be a psychologist to do this. So if a kid says to you something like, nobody likes me right now, which I've actually heard teenagers say during this pandemic because kids aren't reaching out. You have them not fix it and say, oh my gosh, yes, everybody loves you. But instead you say, okay, tell me why. Give me the reasons why you think that. Well, this person didn't call me back. I wasn't invited to go out with the 3 friends who went out. Okay, tell me the reasons that you're wrong. Let me challenge you. Tell me the reasons that you think maybe people do like you. And they start to have to think, and they're like, oh, well, last week my friends invited me out 3 times. And also I got an email from my teacher asking how I was. Oh, and also. And if you can have kids and teens be flexible with this, and this is good for adults too. So parents, you can use this on yourselves. The goal is not change the thought, right? The goal says challenge the thought. All you want to do is give that child flexibility in their thinking. And so these are the ways that we work on coping. And I put these in here, and I'll stop in just a minute so we can have time for questions. But I put these in here because I think it's so important we have actual things to do and not just say we have anxiety and depression and that's just life, because it is, but we also know we can do things. What is not on this slide, but what I mentioned earlier before I wrap up is, we have made treatment more accessible during COVID. There is telehealth. We have opened more appointments. I know that my colleagues in the community have done so as well. I know that our primary care sites all have psychologists now. So we're really working on that. If none of these things seem to be helping, right? So we can go, if we go back to this other slide of when do we think we need treatment? We've tried it. We've tried breathing. We've tried challenging thoughts. We've tried this, and my kid still seems depressed. Then it is time to kind of seek help. So I think, my big points here are not that we're going to get rid of anxiety and fear and depression, especially during a pandemic. But my goal here is I want people to talk about it. I want mental health to be something that you leave tonight and have a conversation with your kids about. How are you doing? It's a simple question. It doesn't have to be, are you depressed? How are you feeling? And if they're like, good, tell me what emotion you're feeling, right? And the more we do that, and the more we use these skills, the better kids become at figuring out what to do with themselves, and the better you all will become as adults and parents at figuring these things out too. So I know I'm going to save some time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I can't see if there even are Q&A. But I'm happy to take questions, thoughts, and sort of answer any questions that folks have.
Dr. Walls, there's a question in the Q&A. It says, how do we deal with the holidays coming up and the disappointment with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I first will start with what I always start with, which is, the first piece I always deal with both my adult friends and colleagues and patients is a little bit of empathy goes a long way here, right? I think we're all struggling with this. I think it's okay to say that. We just canceled Thanksgiving with our family, and I think that a lot of people are going through that. So what do we do? The first thing is the same way I talked about talking about COVID with your family. I think you can talk about this concept of changed holidays, right? So sit down at your kitchen table. Don't do it when you're annoyed because your COVID rates just went up and you saw it on the news and you had to call your sister-in-law and cancel. Find time. Sit down as a family and do two things. Number one is talk about what your plan is. Be honest with your kids. Be honest with yourselves. This is what we can do this year. This is what we can't. Once you do that and let people feel what they're going to feel, then the next thing I want families to do is to think about, what are the positives? What are the things that we can do? And to have everybody in your family, and it sounds a little corny, write them down. So, that might look like your, elementary school kid is like, well, I'm excited because we get to watch a movie on Thanksgiving because we'll be home and we'll have our Netflix, right? For your teenagers, what might that look like? Well, if it's just the four of us, I get to go FaceTime my friends later on because grandma's not going to get mad at me. It might be that you guys talk about the fun things you're going to do on those days. But we know that holidays coming up are going to be a big deal. And the truth is that we have to have some empathy for people and know that this is just going to be a really difficult time. I'm just looking to see. I see another question pop up here. So this question that just popped up says, thoughts for a nonverbal student who's showing signs of depression, refusing to leave his room. If he leaves the room, refuses to leave the house, looking for ways to support him and his family. That's a great question. We have, I think one of the hardest things during the pandemic is helping kids who are either nonverbal or have other disabilities that make it harder for them to understand what's going on, right? To figure out what to do. So the first thing that I think of immediately with this is if you're looking for ways to support the family, I would say making sure that the family knows that they can use telehealth, right? The kid doesn't have to leave the house. The kid can be in his room on his iPad with the mom or the dad or an aunt, right? If the kid is nonverbal and not going to speak in the session, but they can still work on what to do and they can address some of those tantrum-like behaviors. But secondarily, I think that one of the first things you can do if you are seeing this as more depression and the family maybe is seeing it as behavioral is to say, it seems like perhaps this is a bigger issue. Perhaps this is a depression going on. Can I help you get in touch with a therapist? I'll also plug our autism and developmental clinic at AI because I think, we've done a really good job of getting kids in who are nonverbal or who have other disabilities who perhaps need developmental specialists who can address those. So I think that's where I'd start. I think that's it's a long-winded, I think, problem to solve in terms of how do we treat the depression, but I think getting them in touch with someone is really important. I see another question pop up here, which is how do we address teenagers who are constantly angry because they can't do what they want? This is like all of my patients right now. So this is a great question. There's a couple things. One is I've been working really hard with teenagers to think about what are the things that you do have control over? Because a lot of times what teenagers are mad about is that they feel that developmentally, this is a time in their life they're supposed to be exerting independence. They're going to try new things. They're going to see what works for them and what doesn't. And Now, during COVID, we're saying, sorry, you can't have any of that. So what I've been trying to do with my teenagers is figuring out where they can have control, right? So what are the things that you can have control over? Well, I can choose to do X, Y, Z. Okay, let's first of all talk about choosing to keep your community safe. So a lot of teenagers, even though I expect them to fight back with me on it, I say, like, part of your decisions you're making are to help keep people safe. Look how great your family is, because you guys are not going to spread COVID. You are going to wash your hands because you know that keeps people safe. You are going to wear your mask because you know that that makes you part of the solution, not part of the problem. And it sounds mind gamey, but I don't mean it in that way. Instead, it's giving them back that control. The more control they have, the better they feel. And then the other thing is, I would talk about things you do allow them to do. So what are the things that perhaps you're comfortable letting them do, and to let them decide when they do them, how they do them, right? And it might be that you are able to, as the adult in the house, even say things like, all right, I'll give you extra privileges on, maybe one or two things that you didn't have them before. So these are good places to start. But I know these are difficult things, and I know this is a difficult topic, which is why we're sort of talking about it. So I think I'm going to hand this back over to Heidi, maybe.
Thank you, Dr. Walls. Actually, we're going to pass it back on to over to Catherine Dolan.
Great.
Thank you. I think that we're going to make it through the forest of unknowing, the maze of uncertainty, and the troubled sea with our children. Thank you so much. Some of the things that you talk about sound so simple when you hear them, but we just didn't think of them. And it's so important to have someone point them out. And I think it's something that we probably need to hear more than once. But thank you so much for being here and for answering our questions. I just want to throw a quick poll up on the screen. Let's just ask people what brings them joy. Do we have that polling question, Heidi? Maybe yes, maybe no. It would bring me joy if the technology would work. There it is. That brings me joy when technology works the way it's supposed to. So take a look. What brings you joy? Because it's so easy to see the glass as half empty right now, because we have a lot of half-empty glasses. But what brings you joy? So if you would answer, we can see the answers. We can see the percentages in the room, and it would be great to take the temperature of some of that in the room. And you can do lots of choices. So I want you to stay tuned while we're doing the poll, because we have a drawing for valuable prizes for reaching this land of bliss. We do have some Amazon gift cards this evening, and we have $25, 2 of those, and we're going to do a randomized drawing. It's also a wonderful little piece of technology that we're going to play with tonight. And then we have a $50 Amazon gift card, which could be a lot of fun for the holidays. But I want to show us, the children have arrived in the land of bliss, and can we just see a quick video of that, Pam? Can you cue that up for us? Ah, yes.
Our goal at Gateway is to take students who struggle in a classroom and really help prepare them for life.
One thing we try to provide is a healthy atmosphere, like a caring environment, somewhere where they can be them. And they might not get that elsewhere. They might not see that elsewhere, but they get to see that here.
If a child feels included and feels that they are part of a community and feels that they can contribute to that community, they're going to be successful. And when they are successful in school, that's going to affect their whole life. They're going to go into high school knowing they can be successful. They're going to go to college knowing they have been successful. They're going to take it into their life. They're going to look back on Gateway and say, I remember that teacher. That teacher believed in me.
You know you're in a really good school if you have teachers that are willing to go the extra mile to give you the help that you need.
Part of our mission here at Gateway to ensure academic success for all of our students is Success Block. Success Block is the first period of every day where the entire school is in small group instruction. The groups are very small, not usually more than 1 on 6, and we're addressing students specifically where their needs are and ensuring their understanding and success so that when they move forward academically, there are no holes in their learning.
What makes this group of people special, what makes the school special, is how we're really dedicated to the final product of our students, how we're dedicated into this arts integration. When we're in music class, one of the things we learned about was sound. Sound comes from vibrations and vibrations that move through the air. So now we're talking science, and they can see how those things connect, and not just in science, but anything from math to learning about quarter notes. You have 4 quarters into $1, and that's how we have 4 quarter notes into a beat. Can you clap that out?
I've spent the last few years as the Wilson Reading teacher here at Gateway Lab School. Wilson Reading is a scientifically evidence-based program that supports learners who have struggled with reading. I use auditory, visual, and each lesson. Kinesthetic being we tap, act, cat. So they understand how to break down each word and then put it back together. I've had students in 1 year, they'll grow 2 years of reading. So if they came to me on first grade, by the time they leave in 1 year, they may be in 3rd grade reading.
That experience with that class, with her, with that teacher, she opened my eyes to reading.
Right.
Our program at Gateway may look different than in a traditional school setting. They're highly engaged and highly interacting with the text that they're reading. They're acting out specific scenes. They're building projects based off of specific chapters.
I've been doing this for a long time, and I can tell you a lot of students, a lot of young people might not know how to express it talking, but they can sing it, they can play it, they can color it, they can act it out. The thing is, you have to know the whole student, and that's what it comes down to. The whole student. Where do they start? Where do they end up? And sometimes just a score on a paper for one small subject doesn't explain all that.
I'm really excited about the future of Gateway, and I am really excited about the potential of so many other children out there that will have the opportunity that we can provide for them.
The tremendous growth that you see through these students from their first day coming in to now they're in college and succeeding, and they have become the best that they can be, and that's exciting.
When we see kids at the end of the school year and they've gotten on the bus and they're crying because they have to go home for the summer, we know we've done a great job.
Thank you. You saw the results of our poll. You saw that family seems to have ranked #1 in what brings us joy, but so many other things bring us joy. And my hope is that during this holiday season, we can find those things that bring us joy. And again, I want to say thank you to Dr. Walls, because truly you being with us tonight has brought, I think, a lot of joy to all of us, and certainly an encouragement to parents and to teachers and educators alike. So thank you for the hard work that you do. So let's see if we can have a randomized drawing and get names for our gift cards, 25, 25, and 50. You need to be present to win is what they tell me, and it cannot be an employee of Gateway Lab School. So Pam, can we do a randomized drawing and find out our winners? And a little drum roll, please, for that technology piece. Well, I don't know. It worked earlier. If it's not going to cooperate with us, here's what we're going to do. You will have to trust us that we will do a randomized drawing, and we will contact the winners of the $25 gift certificates to Amazon and for the $50 gift certificate to Amazon. Pam, if you are there and can give us a quick answer about our drawing, I would love to know. Otherwise, we are going to say thank you and good night to all who have joined us. Oh, wait, here we go. It's going to happen. Yes, more joy. A randomized drawing that's working. Thank you. All right, we have a winner, Ellie Quinn. Ellie Quinn is going to win a $25 gift certificate to Amazon. Let's pick another name. Who is our second winner? Who knew this could be so fun? Our second is Jordan Bannock. Our second winner, Jordan Bannock, will win a $25 gift card to Amazon. And now we do need a drum roll. Where is Mr. Everett, our music teacher, when you need him, and the drumming club? We need a drum roll for the $50 gift card. Let's see who it's going to be. And the winner is John McGarry. And congratulations, John. Happy shopping at Amazon with your $50 gift card. And thank you for being with us tonight. So again, I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. It was a lot of fun to try something new, to try something a little different. Thank you for your patience as we tried out our technology and just experimenting and being creative with some of these things, and for all of your flexibility in allowing our mistakes as well. So thank you again. Have a wonderful evening. Dr. Walls, our guide, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
We will be in touch. We have an open house coming up this week on the 19th. It's going to be virtual. And we have another on December the 12th. It's a virtual open house. If you look at our website, you will have a way to access that. And we hope to do another in our parenting series in January. So we're looking forward to another event coming up. And hopefully many of you will join us for that as well. Have a good evening. Take care. Good night.